Summer may be coming to an end, but that doesn't mean our garden is going to end with it. In fact, our fall and winter crops are just getting started. Today I'll show you what we're doing now in mid-September to ensure a continuous harvest into the fall and winter from our Zone 5 garden. Our first frost is just 5 weeks away, so the clock is running out on summer crops like the squash, scarlet runner beans, cucumbers, and sweet potatoes in the bed behind me. But a few beds back, there are cool weather crops that won't be coming to an end anytime soon. In fact, they're just getting started. Let's go take a look. Last weekend I harvested potatoes and butternut squash from this bed. And this weekend I amended the soil with worm castings from our worm bins. And then I planted lettuce, perpetual spinach, kale, and mustard greens. All of these crops can handle a light frost. And I'll be adding a low tunnel with 6 mil plastic next month to make sure these crops continue into the fall. Though I like to direct sow whenever possible, I started these plants in seedling trays about a month ago in the front yard and transplanted them when space became available after the potato harvest. Soon I'll also transplant spinach and carrots into the bed. Though transplanting carrots isn't typically recommended, we find they transplant well when we start them in biodegradable pots and plant the entire pot into the garden. In this case we're using cow pots, as well as pots made from empty toilet paper and paper towel rolls. The pots allow us to transplant carrots without disturbing their roots, and the pots will decompose in the soil to allow the carrots to grow to their full length. The last crop we'll be growing in this bed is mosh, or corn salad, which I'll plant today for a harvest in late winter and early spring. Mosh is a cold-hardy green that we've grown for many years. We let it self-sow in other beds, but this is the first time we've grown it here, so I'll have to plant the seeds myself. I plant them around the perpetual spinach, lettuce, and mustard greens, which I don't expect to survive the winter. Planting mosh will give us a succession of crops as the perpetual spinach, lettuce, and mustards die back, and mosh grows to take their place in late winter. Next month, before our first frost, I'll cover this bed with a low tunnel with 6 mil greenhouse plastic. Even with that protection, I don't expect all of the crops in this bed to make it through the winter. Carrots, mosh, and spinach should make it, but the perpetual spinach, lettuce, kale, and mustard greens probably won't. This is in part because this bed gets no direct sun for several weeks around the winter solstice. To improve our chances of growing cool weather crops all the way through the winter, we grow most of them in beds at the back of the yard. These beds are further away from the house and get direct sun even around the winter solstice. Let's take a look at what we're growing there. This bed gets at least some direct sun all winter long, which allows us to grow more cool weather crops all the way through winter under a low tunnel with 6 mil greenhouse plastic. Sometime in November or December, I'll also add cold frames over some of the crops for additional protection from the cold. In the front of the bed we're growing 2 perennial greens, Good King Henry and French sorrel. I expect both to survive into at least December under the low tunnel. In the middle of the bed we're growing perennial sea kale, which should also make it into December. Soon I'll transplant spinach into the empty space between the sea kale plants and cover it with a cold frame in November or December. The spinach should easily survive the entire winter under 2 layers of protection provided by the low tunnel and cold frame. Finally, at the back of the bed, I recently harvested the last of the radishes, and we lost our turnip seedlings to pests, so we currently have only carrots growing. To fill in the space, I decided to plant beets and more turnips. Planting them this late, I'm not sure if the roots will fully develop, but I'm hoping to at least get some greens. I'll cover these crops with cold frames, and I expect the carrots to survive the entire winter. This is the latest I've grown beets and turnips, so it'll be interesting to see how well they do under a low tunnel and cold frame. The next bed that we'll harvest from this winter is this one. Next month we'll cut back these sunchoke plants and start harvesting the tubers. We'll also take measures that will allow us to continue to harvest sunchokes all winter long. After cutting back the sunchokes, we'll mulch the bed with leaves and cover it with storm windows. This keeps the soil from freezing and allows us to harvest sunchokes as needed for meals all winter long. The next location we'll be growing in this fall and winter is this compost bin, which is in one of the sunniest spots in the garden at that time of year. After fall cleanup, the bin will be completely full and hopefully generating a little bit of heat. I'll build a small raised bed on top of the pile, fill it with soil, transplant lettuce and spinach into it, and then cover it with a cold frame. Then in December, I'll cover the whole compost bin with 6 mil plastic. Using this approach, I hope to grow lettuce and spinach all winter long. Now let's take a look inside the hoop house, where we do most of our fall and winter growing. Here in the hoop house, we're already growing a wide variety of cool weather crops. Some are perennials, some are self-sown annuals, and some were recently planted. Before our first frost, we'll cover our low tunnels with plastic and we'll bring in our cold frames. And then in November or December, we'll cover the entire hoop house with plastic, giving us 2 layers of protection from the cold. In addition to the many plants you see here, more and more volunteer cool weather crops will come up to fill out the bed. These crops include claytonia, mosh, mustard greens, kale, collards, and chard. We'll also transplant more annuals like lettuce, spinach, and carrots. And of course, the bed is loaded with perennials like tree collards, red vein sorrel, and chives. The 2 layers of protection provided by low tunnels and cold frames inside the hoop house will keep many of these crops growing well into the winter, and some all the way to spring. Spinach, carrots, mosh, and claytonia are particularly cold hardy and should have no trouble surviving even a very cold winter under protection in Zone 5. If you'd like to find out if you still have time to plant for the fall, please see the link in the description to the Planting Date Calculator tool. The tool provides a list of cool weather crops and their planting dates based on your first frost date. There's also a link to our fall-winter garden layout, which shows everything we'll be growing this fall and winter. As we close, I'll share images from last year's winter garden. I'll include the dates the pictures were taken to give you an idea of how long the crops thrived in winter. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more videos on how to grow a lot of food on a little land without spending much or working harder than you have to.